My name's Robin, and I am the Associate State Director for Community Outreach with ARP Nebraska. Today, we're going to visit with Sarah Browning from the Nebraska Extension Office, who's going to demonstrate for us how to create a container garden. So if you're short on space, try your hand at creating a patio or a container garden. Now, these containers fit very well on apartment patios or balconies, as well as in larger landscapes. The key to being successful is going to be involving using large containers, a good growing media, and selecting vegetables and flowering plants that are sized right for the containers that you're using to grow. Now, Sarah Browning is our speaker today, and she is an educator for the Nebraska Extension for the last 23 years. Sarah's going to discuss these various containers that work well, the soil mixtures, the watering, and the plants that thrive in these containers. So this may be just what a caregiver would need when they're looking for low-key ways to relax. So I want to thank you for joining us, Sarah, and we're excited to get started to learn about the ways to create container gardens.
Thank you so much, Robin. I appreciate you inviting me to be on the program today, and I appreciate being able to speak to all of the AARP members out there. And hopefully this will be a fun and enjoyable topic for you. Container gardening is pretty simple to do, and it has a lot of benefits in that it can be a real problem solver, especially if you don't have a lot of space. You know, sometimes you only have a small patio or deck to do any gardening, and container gardens are perfect for that because you can make them any size that you would like so that they are just right for the space you have available. Plus, they're easy to care for, and so there's not a lot of weeding involved. It really limits the amount of time that you have to put into taking care of the plants that you have in your containers. If you have a home landscape, sometimes our soil is not the best. Sometimes our soil can be very heavy or very clay-like, or on the other end of the spectrum, it can have a lot of sand. So having that soil that you have created that has a really good quality to it can be a big benefit when we're working with container gardens. If you have too much shade in your landscape, having a container garden that is small enough that it's movable, or you could even go to the extent of putting it on a wheeled plant dolly so that you could move it into a sunny area, that can be a big benefit too, especially if you want to grow vegetables or herbs or something like that that do require fairly high light. And then think about, what kind of plants you're going to be putting in your container. So here, this container that we're looking at on the picture right now is a container that has succulents. So all of these plants have the same light requirements. They like very high light, very full sun, even in the middle of a hot afternoon. They don't like a lot of water, so they don't need to be watered very often. And they have a similar fertility requirement too. So when you're putting your containers together, and we're going to talk more about selecting plants for containers later on, keep that in mind, that you want to make sure that you're choosing plants that have similar requirements so that your container is successful. So there are a few challenges, though, to growing container plantings. And one of the big ones is container size. One thing I see home gardeners doing quite a bit is they choose small containers. And the problem with that is that the root mass and the soil mass in those small containers is small, and it dries out very quickly. So that means to keep those plants alive and doing well, you're going to have to water them quite often. Sometimes on a very hot day, you may have to water them twice a day. So think about that, about what size of container that you're going to be working with. Ideally, you want your container to hold enough soil volume that your plant can develop a good root system, enough that it will really be healthy and vigorous and grow well and flower well. But, you want the container to be something that you can physically manage. Now, fortunately, we have a lot of different options out there in the garden centers. So you have a lot of different things to choose from. Some will be heavier, like ceramics or clay. Some will be lighter, like some of the plastics that have been formed to mimic a clay pot and look very similar to a clay pot. So you have a lot of options to choose from when you're picking out a container. And as I said earlier, you want to be sure that you match the plants that you put in your container so that they have very similar site and watering requirements. Sorry about that. Okay. So when you're choosing a container, really just about any container will do. We see people do flower containers in old bathtubs, in old wheelbarrows. I've seen some people use old jeans that they tied the legs together in a knot and filled the legs with soil, and they planted flowers in the waste. So you can do container planting in just about anything. The only requirement is that it will hold soil, but that it does have drainage holes so that the water, when you're watering, will drain away and it won't pool in the container and cause excessively wet soil, which can lead to root rot. Now, sometimes with the wooden containers, we get questions from gardeners about treated wood and what woods are really safe from a food safety standpoint. If you're going to be growing vegetables, what type of wood containers are best to use? So we would suggest that you use naturally rot resistant woods like cedar or redwood. Those would be great choices. Or if you have another, like maybe you're building a raised bed that you want to make into a garden, you could use the copper treated lumber. And copper treated lumber is very safe from a food perspective. You want to stay away from any of the old arsenic treated woods, but honestly, for home gardeners, those woods are really no longer available, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. So from a functional consideration for your container, you want your container to be able to stand upright. And it may seem silly to even say that, but I have quite often seen people put plants in containers that were quite top heavy. And when you get windy conditions, then the container is continually blowing over. So make sure that there's enough weight and mass in the base of the container that the plant and the container itself will be stable. And then again, consider the volume of the root mass. I've said that already about 3 times, but that is a very, very important consideration to making sure that your plants are going to be healthy and vigorous and do well. Now, if you do choose a clay container, which is very porous, realize that the clay container is going to dry out quicker than a similar container that was made of plastic. Plastic holds water better and doesn't lose it as quickly as clay does. So keep that in mind. But then also think about self-watering containers. There are a lot of self-watering containers out there now on the market, which can make watering easier. So you're just filling up a water reservoir, and then there's a wick that goes from the reservoir up to the soil that is constantly pulling moisture up into the soil root ball. So that's another consideration to think about that can make watering easier. So again, when we talk about container and root ball size, another thing that you have to realize is the heat of that soil. And when you're dealing with a small container, the soil in the container itself can get quite hot. In fact, on a very hot day, the soil temperature may be close to the actual air temperature itself. So the soil temperature may be 90 or 95 on a very, very hot, August or September day. And then again, if the container is metal, the metal is going to transmit that heat much more quickly to the roots of the plants. And if you've ever seen, plants growing in a container and you've taken the plant out of the container, roots of plants tend to circle right around the inside edge of the container itself. And if the metal of that container is very hot, you could actually get some root death occurring. The same is true of very dark colored containers. The soil immediately on the inside of the dark colored container can be quite hot. So keep those things in mind as you're choosing your containers. And again, make sure that maybe if you're using a metal container, it's going to be shaded from direct sun in the afternoon. Or maybe you choose a different kind of container that's going to be out in the very hot, full sun. Maybe plastic or wood would be a better choice. Another thing to think about from a design perspective is make sure that your containers are in scale with your house. Quite often I see people choose containers that are quite small and they don't show up well. They don't make a statement against the house or the backdrop where they've been placed. So make sure that your containers are a good scale related to your background so that they really show up and they have that good pop of color that you were hoping to achieve. Okay. So soil for your container. Well, it can be as easy as buying a good potting soil that you get from your local garden or hardware store. That is completely fine. There are a lot of good soil blends available on the market. Typically, what you're going to buy will be a soilless soil mix. So it doesn't actually have any garden dirt in it, but it's made up of a combination of something like peat moss, compost, vermiculite, or perlite. There may be a little bit of sand in there, or there could be some finely chopped up bark chips. Those are very common components of soilless soil blends. It is important that it be soilless, though, because most soil blends that you buy at the garden center are not pasteurized, so they have not been treated to kill off fungi or bacteria in the soil. And if there is actual garden soil in the blend, it's very likely that you're going to have quite a few different pathogens in that soil blend. So using the soilless soil blends is better from the perspective of having a much fewer percentage of disease pathogens in the soil. Plus, the soilless soil blends also, they take in water very well and they drain out water very well. So they don't hold on to water the way that we might experience if you have a very heavy clay soil that you've used in a container. So I would really suggest that you purchase a good potting soil that you find at your garden center. Now, you can also mix compost into a potting soil that you buy from a garden center. Maybe you have a compost pile in your backyard, or you've got a local source of compost that's very high quality. And that can be a great thing because compost has a lot of good organic matter in it, and it has a lot of good nutrients. So one thing to keep in mind, though, is don't put in more than 50% compost. There has been research done that has shown that plants actually start to grow less well, poorer plant vigor when you get above 50% compost in your soil blend. So just keep that in mind and stay below that if you decide to add in compost. Now, if you're growing succulents, like I showed you in that first picture, you might also see something like perlite or sand, or again, the finely ground up bark chips, because they provide that really excellent, well-drained soil that you need for some of these succulent plants. Okay, so if you do want to try mixing up your own soil blend, here's a quick recipe that can get you started. And if you're in the picture that you're looking at right now, the material on the right, the light brownish colored material is vermiculite. The white material in the center is perlite, which is actually a volcanic rock. And then the material on the far left is a shredded peat moss. And so all of these things would be good components for a soil blend. So one good recipe that you could use to put together your own soil mix would be a bushel of peat moss, a bushel of vermiculite, a cup and a quarter of ground limestone, half of a cup of superphosphate, and a cup of a granular 5-10-5 type fertilizer, or something similar. If you can't find a 5-10-5, you could simply use a 5-5-5, a general purpose fertilizer, or a 10-10-10. Anything along that line would work. And then just moisten the materials and mix them up real well, and that could be a great soil mix to use as well. So let's talk just a little bit about watering, because watering is one of the areas where we see quite often plants aren't getting the amount of water that they need, and when plants die, it's quite often because they've either been watered way too much and they've got a root rot going on, or they haven't gotten enough water. So how much water you need to give your plants is going to be quite variable. It's going to depend on, again, how big your containers are. It's going to depend on what type of plants you've put in them. It'll depend on how big those plants are. Early in the season, when the plants are relatively small, like the plants you see in this picture, they're not going to use a whole lot of water. You may be able to get by with just watering once a week. But when those plants are fully grown in the later part of the summer, or if you have vegetable plants and the vegetables have fruits on them, you're going to have to water more often. And then, hand in hand with that, later in the season, you're going from cool spring conditions to hot, dry summer conditions. And that's going to be a big factor also in how often you need to water. So one thing to keep in mind is that when you water your plants, your goal is to water the entire root ball. You don't want to put just a little bit of water around each plant. You want to soak the whole root ball down. Ideally, you want to put enough water in the container until you start to see water draining out of the drainage holes at the bottom. And then the key is you wait and you don't water again until that top inch to inch and a half of the soil start to feel dry. And I think the best way to determine that is just to stick your finger in the soil and see if it feels dry. And when that top inch to inch and a half is dry, then water again. Of course, you can also look for signs like your plant's wilting or, just a little bit of wilt. We don't want them to get too far down that wilty road, but just a little bit of wilt, that can also be a sign that your plants are ready to be watered again, okay? Now, here you can see on this slide, I've talked about leaching the soil periodically. That with outdoor containers, that's not as big of an issue as it is with indoor houseplants. But if you start to see an accumulation of like little crystalline white structures at the top of the soil, which are accumulated salts that could be coming from excess fertilizer in your soil, then it probably would be a good idea to leach. And leaching is basically what I had already described, putting enough water in the container until you start to see water running out the bottom. And when you're trying to leach to get rid of excess soil salts, you would want to do that about 2 to 3 times within the same day to try to really move those extra fertilizer salts out through the drainage holes. Okay. Now, if you want to try to put woody plants in your containers, say for example you want to put some boxwoods or some yews or something like that in a container, you're going to have to make sure that you water those in the winter too. They need water in the winter just as much as they do in the summer, although not as often. Typically about 1 good soaking a month in the winter months when the plants are not growing would be sufficient. But keep in mind that you will have to take care of them even in the winter months. So here's another question that we get quite often about containers. Do I need to fill the container completely with soil? So if you have a really big container, like the whiskey barrel that you see in this top picture, and you can see the gentleman there is filling that whiskey barrel with some packing peanuts, or he's putting packing peanuts in the bottom of the whiskey barrel. And then the picture in the lower picture, you see this person has used some old milk jugs, and they have kind of taken up some of the space in the bottom of that container with some old milk jugs. Well, ideally, it really would be better if you filled the whole container with soil. We run into a situation called a perched water table, where you have different media, and in this case, it would be either the packing peanuts or the old milk jugs, where water doesn't drain through that very well. The water will stay in that upper soil level until that upper soil level is completely saturated, and only then will it start to move down into those lower layers of soil. That wouldn't seem to be very intuitive, because obviously the packing peanuts and the milk jugs, wouldn't be any inhibition to water moving through them. But that's just the way that water moves. It tends to stay within one soil media until that media is completely saturated before it starts to drain away. So if at all possible, we would say yes, fill your container completely with soil. And then how much soil your plants need varies. It depends on whether you're growing annuals or perennials, or if you're growing woody plants, or if it's vegetables or fruits. All of these different types of plants have different rooting depths. And so, if you're growing woody plants or vegetables, they could easily have a root system that goes down 24 inches. And so they would need a good percentage of that depth for root growth and development. Okay, so how do you fertilize your plants? Well, there's lots of different ways you can do it. You can use a water-soluble fertilizer like the Miracle-Gro plant food you see in the top picture. Miracle-Gro is so common, we can find it almost everywhere. And it's fine. It's fine to water with a water-soluble fertilizer, but realize that water-soluble products are kind of a quick burst of fertilizer, and they don't stay in the soil for a long time. So you have to fertilize more often if you're going to use a water-soluble fertilizer. With annual flowers, they are very high feeders typically to put on all of those flowers. With my containers at home, I water them with a water-soluble fertilizer about once a week to keep those plants really growing actively and blooming their best. Now, you could also, though, think about a slow-release product, and you could use both together. You could mix some slow-release fertilizer into your soil before planting, and then use the water-soluble also throughout the year. Or you could do either. You could do just slow release or just fast release. It kind of depends on what you have available and what you would like to do. So the granules that you see in the lower picture are a polymer-coated fertilizer. And that means the fertilizer granules themselves are coated with a plastic-like coating. And that outer coating is broken down by soil microbes and moisture and heat and UV radiation. And so the fertilizer in those granules some is available quicker and some is available at a slower rate. So that's why it gives you that long extended period of fertilizer available to your plants. One common brand of fertilizer that we see available to home gardeners that looks like this is called Osmocote. And once again, if you wanted to use a combination of slow release and quick release, or a water soluble, that would be completely fine. All right. So I just wanted to point out real quickly here that you can quite easily grow vegetables in containers, just as much as we can grow the beautiful annuals and perennials. So here in the picture on the left screen, you see a very tropical container, and they've put some cannas in the center of this container. But you also see that darker colored foliage of a plant that's shorter than the cannas. Those are ornamental sweet peppers, or excuse me, I should just say ornamental peppers, because they're not sweet, they're hot. And we see a lot of ornamental peppers in the garden centers these days. They are very popular right now. They've combined that with some lantana, which are the orange flowers, and then an ornamental sedge, I believe, which is the grassy chartreuse colored foliage, and then a creeper that's growing, weeping down the sides. So you can mix the ornamentals and the vegetable plants together. So in the plants on the right-hand picture, you see they've done the same thing with the one container has some peppers in it, and the other container has some tomatoes in it. So they've mixed together their vegetables and their ornamentals. And you can certainly do that so that you can actually get some harvest out of your containers and some food that you can use in the kitchen. Okay. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to show you some different container ideas. And I want to give all of the credit for these images to White Flower Farms. If you've never purchased plants from White Flower Farms, they are a great online mail order nursery. They sell both annuals and perennials. And over the last several years, they have put together some really beautiful ideas on plants that do well in containers to show you what they're going to look like, before you purchase them. So if you visit their website, whiteflowerfarm.com, and you look under the annual section, annual container design, you'll find these plus a lot more great ideas on different annuals that you can put together. All right, so let's start off with the first one. And now that I gave that great plug to White Flower Farms, I have to say that this first image we're looking at actually came from proven winners. So I'll just mention that real quickly. So we have a really unusual tropical looking container here. And this would be a great container to put in the full sun. But we have a dwarf Egyptian papyrus in the middle of this container, which gives you a really unusual architectural almost look to this container that could really provide a striking, colorful accent to a patio or a deck. So King Tut, dwarf Egyptian papyrus in the middle. Then on the sides, we have a calibrachoa, which is a type of petunia, or closely related to a petunia, I should say, which is the beautiful kind of grape purple color. That one is called grape punch. And then the flower in the middle, the dark colored maroonish flower or leaf in the middle, I should say, is a ornamental sweet potato or an ipomia. And we see a lot of these ipomoeas in gardens and being used in containers. They make a great colorful foliage accent. And as that plant grows, it's going to weep down the side of that container, and it'll provide a beautiful trailing effect as it grows and kind of weeps down the side. Okay, so here's another one. And the plants in the middle, the upright flowers in the middle, are ones that I really want to point out to you. That is a plant called summer snapdragon, and it is an annual. It's actually related to our normal snapdragons, but the genus name of this plant is Angelonia, or summer snapdragon. And I love these plants in containers because they come in a variety of sizes. You can get some very short ones, and then you can get some that are up to about 2 feet tall. But as the flowers start to fade on each of these stalks, all you need to do is pinch the stalk down, and the plant will send up a new shoot, and it will just keep blooming all summer long. So they can add a lot of color to a container. In my opinion, more color than you get from traditional snapdragons, which seem to grow a little bit slower. But the Angelonias, you're going to find them in colors of white and purple and light lavender and pink, and they can be used in a lot of great container plantings. Now, here in this container, we also have another ornamental sweet potato. In this case, it's a bright yellowy green chartreuse color. That's the Sweet Caroline light green sweet potato vine, or ipomea. And then another petunia, or a supertunia, Picasso in purple, which has a beautiful bicolored flower with kind of a dark pink center and then green around the rim or around the edge of the flower. So this would be a great container to put in full to partial sun. It would do very well. Now here's the container for shade. So you've got a shady deck or patio or a shady corner that you want to brighten up a little bit. This would be a good one to think about. And we've got some unusual plants here. So we've got 2 different types of coleus. The tallest coleus is the tall plants with the bicolored maroon and light green leaf. And that one is called, excuse me, that one is called coleus dipped in wine. And then just below that, we have kind of an arrow-shaped leaf that's white and green. That is the caladium, white Christmas, which grows from a bulb. And you can save that bulb from year to year and regrow it, in your containers for several seasons. Now, the other coleus that we have is off to the left, and it's a darker maroonish green with a dark maroon colored leaf with a green edge. And that is the coleus inky fingers. It has a much smaller leaf compared to the coleus dipped in wine. Then we have a white fuchsia in the center that has those beautiful nodding kind of bell-shaped flowers. And on the far right lower corner of this container, we have a begonia escargot, which is a beautiful Rex begonia that has leaves that kind of come out in a twirly fashion, almost like a snail. And that's why it's called escargot. Okay. There's also a begonia baby white, or baby wing white, I should say, which is in the very far lower left-hand corner of this container. But again, this would be a great container for partial partial shade to full shade. Would do very, very well. Okay. Here's another one. This one is called Tribal Fusion. At least that's what the folks at White Flower Farm are calling it. And the tall plant that we have in the middle here is Senchisia speciosa. And then again, we have another coleus, Merlin's Magic. And this one's a little harder to see. It's on the left-hand side. It's that kind of maroon colored foliage just below the Senchisia. Then we have we have a begonia fireworks, which is the silvery, the tricolored leaf that's kind of silvery green, dark green with a maroon edge right in the middle. We have a heuchera Dolce Key Lime Pie, which is the little green plant that's right kind of down in the middle, the lower middle of this container. Then again, we have the chartreuse colored sweet potato vine on the far lower right. And then we have a couple of different impatiens. We have a bright kind of a fuchsia pink impatiens, the fanfare fuchsia, and then we have the butterfly lilac impatiens, which is on the lower left. So this again would be another container that would do really well in partial shade. Okay. Here's another one for the more shady spots of our landscapes. In this one, we have a really big begonia griffin, which is the tall, really striking foliage that you see at the top of this container. Then we have another fuchsia, Gartenmeister Baumstead, and we have an impatient, which is a bicolored impatient flower, which is kind of orange with a white eye. And then we have a begonia Daybreak, which is the lower pendulous kind of a begonia on the right-hand side. Okay. Now here we're back to full sun. We've got another begonia in this container, and the begonia here, dragon wing pink, is the flowers are kind of mixed in, but you can see the medium pink flowers in the lower right. You can see them again up in this kind of the center left. That is the begonia. Then the fuchsia is the plant in the upper right that has the slender nodding trumpet-shaped flowers. Then we have a coleus sedona, which has a dark maroon foliage. And then the strawberry drop coleus, which is a bicolored with maroon and green, and then a really dark maroon. And then once again, we've got the ipomia, the chartreuse colored sweet potato vine. Okay. Now here is another one for a full sunny area. And again, in this particular container, they've used that summer snapdragon again, the Angelonia angel face blue bicolor. And this particular Angelonia has white flowers with kind of a dark blue center to them, which is very pretty. Then we have the sweet potato vine, ornamental sweet potato vine, which is the dark maroon foliage kind of on the middle right. The osteospermum or African daisy is a great plant that we see doing really, really well in the spring gardens. They love the cooler temperatures of May and June in Nebraska. As we get into the mid part of the summer, they tend to not bloom as much. So you could either swap it out and put in something that would do well under the really extreme heat that we have in Nebraska in midsummer. Or you could look for one of the osteospermums that does well under heat. And there are some that perform well under hot conditions. And then once again, they've put in a petunia, a Supertunia Royal Velvet, which is the beautiful dark purple flowers that you see on the right and the left. But this is a container that would do great in partial to full sun. Okay. So in this container, I wanted to show you another plant that I really like to use in containers, and that is the Pennisetum rubrum. And that it's called red pennisetum is the common name. And that's the upright plant that you see right in the middle that has those kind of fuzzy cattail-like seed heads. It adds wonderful movement to a container. You know, when the wind is blowing and the grass is kind of swaying back and forth, it just looks really, really beautiful. And so with the Pennisetum rubrum in this container, they have also added in an ageratum, artist purple, which is the light purplish flower on the top left of this container. Then we have a Calibrachoa, a Cabaret apricot, which is the small little petunia-like flowers in the lower right-hand side. Then we've got the Coleus freckles, which is the pretty bicolored foliage that has the kind of orangey and with the yellow edges. And the Pennisetum rubrum in the middle. Then we have the Petunia Suncatcher Deep Purple, which is the bigger deep purple flowers that you see kind of right down the middle of this container. And then excuse me, I think I misspoke. The Nemesia Bluebird are the smaller blue flowers up at the top left, and the Ageratum Artist Purple are the smaller purple flowers kind of in the back left of this container that it's kind of turned away from us a little bit. This is another great container for full sun. Okay, so I wanted to throw this container in to show you that there have been a lot of breeding work done on coleus over the last, 30, 40 years. And we have a lot of beautiful foliage effects to choose from just among the coleus themselves. And coleus is not just segregated to the shade garden anymore. There are plenty of great coleus that do just great in full sun, as all the coleus in this container are doing. So you can see how you can put together a beautiful container just using coleus alone. You see, they've used 6 different types of coleus in this particular container. All of them do well in the full sun, and they all bring in beautiful different colors and patterns and can create a very striking arrangement in a container. Okay. Here's another one for full sun. This one adds in another pennisetum, which is the grass that you see, but only this one, instead of having kind of reddish maroon foliage with pinkish, dark red pinkish seed heads, this one has normal green foliage and then kind of a pinkish seed head. So this one is called Red Riding Hood. But again, it adds still that great movement that you see in a container where you have added in an ornamental grass like this. Now they've paired that with the Bracteantha, the Sunday's Flame, which is strawflower. You probably know that plant by its common name, strawflower. And those are the little yellow flowers with kind of the orange edge, which are right in the middle of this container. Then they've added in a couple of more sun-loving coleus, the dapple apple, which is the one that's a little bit more greenish, and then the pineapple, which is off to the left, which is a little bit more yellow. Then we have the hedera, which is a English ivy, and you can see that trailing down the front of this container. And then the final plant, the Lysimachia Walkabout Sunset, is a little bit hard to see, but it's the green and yellow variegated leaves, which are just off to the lower right of this container. But this would be, again, a very good container, a great combination of plants to use in a full sun area. Okay. So here's Jazz Festival. And Jazz Festival has, again, the Angelonia, the summer snapdragon, as the upright feature in this container. And then as the kind of filler, the bushy parts of the container, they've used Calibrachoa superbells, another supercal, which is another type of a petunia, the lantana, rose sunrise, which is kind of yellow and orange combination, and then again the Nemesia frutescens bluebird. So we've got another great container for full sun. And then the final container I wanted to show you again was just another example of a great fun container that you can put together using all succulents. And succulents have really become very, very popular at garden centers and with gardeners over the last, I'd say maybe 5 to 10 years. And you can see all of the different foliage colors and textures that you can put together using just succulent plants. One plant I want to point out to you in particular are the little plant in the lower left-hand corner that has those beautiful kind of dark rose flowers. That is Portulaca Rhea Rose. And Portulaca is a beautiful little plant. I've used it a lot in containers in my gardens. They love hot, sunny areas, and they will just bloom and bloom and bloom all summer and give you wonderful color from, I would say, from about end of May until they die with frost in the fall. But most of these plants in this container are actually perennial. So if you were able to take the container into a garage or provide it with some winter protection, you could get these plants to overwinter, and then you could grow them again the next year. So lots and lots of great things that you can do with containers and container gardening in your landscapes. Lots of wonderful ways to bring color to your landscape. So I hope that this presentation has been helpful to you, and I hope that you'll take some time to check out the White Flower Farm website and get some more ideas of additional plants that you can put together and create really beautiful containers.
Sarah, thank you for all of that information. The designs in those containers were amazing, and I never thought of even going online to get different ideas as you did for us today. So I truly appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Of course, I've got some questions. And my first one is, in Nebraska, what would the planting season be for container gardening? When would I be able to start picking up plants at maybe the local nursery and putting them outside?
So I would say I would say ideally you would want to start planting about mid-April. Any earlier than that, and you run the risk of still having some freezing temperatures at night, which could damage the plants in your containers. Now, you could start earlier than that, as long as you're willing to provide some cold protection if we do get some freezing nights coming to us yet this spring.
Okay. Another question I have is with regards to animals, and specifically rabbits. If I would have a container garden outside and it be low to the ground, is there something maybe that would be pretty in a container gardening, but yet repel rabbits so that they're not there eating my bounty?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay.
There really aren't plants that are going to consistently repel rabbits if the rabbits are really determined to get to that container. Even, we sometimes talk about spraying plants with taste repellents like a hot pepper spray or something like that. Sometimes that will work. And if the rabbits chew on a leaf that's been sprayed with a hot pepper spray and they don't like that taste, they might leave it alone. But it's certainly nowhere near 100% effective. So I would just, put your plants up on some kind of a table until they're big enough that they could outgrow any rabbit damage pretty quickly.
Good idea. And my last question is, as we're talking about animals and birds and butterflies, is there anything in a container garden that would be something that would draw butterflies?
Oh, yeah. A lot of the plants that we looked at in some of these containers would be great for butterflies, specifically lantana. They love lantana. Another one that, oh, shoot, I'm forgetting the name. Anything that has a pollen and a nectar, some of the petunias, especially some of the older petunias that have the larger flowers, would be great for butterflies or even hummingbirds sometimes if the flowers are large enough. Geraniums will draw butterflies to containers. The summer snapdragons or even just regular snapdragons, salvia. Either the annual or the perennial types of salvia would be great. Catmint. There really are a lot of different things you could choose from that would be great plants for pollinators.
Yes, you've given me a wide option. I really appreciate it. Well, Sarah, I really want to thank you for going over this information with us today on the different and amazing things that you can do with container gardening. I do want to let everybody know that next week we're going to host a second virtual event with Sarah on blooming with color in Nebraska. Now, this is going to be on choosing new plants for summer color that is a fun spring pastime for any gardener. But if you're choosing plants that will thrive under your specific landscape's condition, it could be more of a challenge. So we're going to learn how to choose annual and perennial plants that grow well in Nebraska gardens for either sun or shade. So for our viewers, if you enjoyed today's session, I please ask that you post this or share it on your page, or even to like our page so others will know about it. Again, Sarah, thank you for joining us today. Your information was wonderful, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Robin.